The breaking news this morning, President Trump says the U.S. carried out large-scale strikes on Venezuela.
Russia has attacked critical energy infrastructure in more Ukrainian cities as temperatures fall as low as minus...
We need Greenland for national protection. They have a very small population.
It's January 2026, and the year is already moving fast. In the span of just a few weeks, the United States seized Venezuela's president, Nicolás Maduro, issued threats against allies, and promised to reshape the world order. International law and human rights are under unprecedented assault around the world, from Ukraine to Sudan. It is hard to make sense of where we're headed when even ceasefires, like the one in Gaza, just don't bring an end to the death and destruction we've seen. As we begin 2026, is this a temporary crisis of the international system or its steady unraveling? Today, we're joined by two people who have spent years documenting, studying, and warning about this moment. Agnès Callamard, Secretary General of Amnesty International and former UN Special Rapporteur here in Oslo to deliver PRIO's annual peace address. And Jørgen Jensehaugen, research professor here at the Peace Research Institute Oslo and a leading expert on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I am Arnaud Siad, and you're listening to PRIO's Peace in a Pod. Agnès, Jørgen, welcome to this episode. We are only 2-3 weeks into 2026, and already we saw a series of alarming events. I mentioned a few in the introduction to this episode. You know, at PRIO, we try to take a step back and make sense of patterns, trends in international affairs. And yes, I think Amnesty International tries to do that a bit as well. And the last report from your organization describes the world as being at a historic juncture, with more attacks on international law and multilateral institutions. We're only just starting 2026, but in your assessment, Agnès, will we see the continued decline of human rights around the world this year?
Well, I don't think the last 15 days are auguring of a very positive outcome for 2026. So on that basis, I will say yes. It is difficult to imagine a different outcome. At the best, I think we can try to maintain the situation as it is. I think it's important, though, to acknowledge and recognize that while the last 15 days have been amounting to organized chaos and designed to be so on purpose, they are coming after at least 1 year of escalation and several years of attacks against the international system. It's important to recognize that the problem is not just in the United States or in Russia, and that we have in many countries around the world, including in Europe, the seeds for the demise of the international system. Yes, there was an acceleration with Russia's aggression of Ukraine. Yes, there was a very strong acceleration with Israel's genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. And of course, the election of Donald Trump is acting like an accelerant on wildfires that are already everywhere around the world. But the roots are deeper. The roots are in our own society. The roots are in the rise of authoritarian policies and politics and behaviors. The roots are in the rejection of anything universal. The roots are in the rise of racism. The roots are in us, not just elsewhere.
And it's striking what you're saying, that this might be in us and not elsewhere. I'm thinking of what just happened in Venezuela and some of the reactions we've seen with people saying, you know, we may not like the way Maduro was removed from office, but good riddance. Others say this is a dangerous precedent. Agnès, what do you think?
Well, I think it's absolutely critical that we claim that both truths are true. and to absolutely reject the approach that consists in opposing those two facts, those two truths. Yes, Maduro was responsible for crimes against humanity, against the Venezuelan people. And yes, the attacks by the United States is unlawful and is a violation of the UN Charter and is opening the gate to more copycat kind of action. Both truths are correct, and we as a human rights organization are insisting that we have a space to claim that both truths are correct. Now, historically speaking, the notion that an armed intervention will deliver anything positive and tangible for the people, I don't think we have a lot of historical evidence to that. I just want to mention Iraq and Libya as case in point. So we need to be very skeptical about the hope that the intervention, the military intervention, the unlawful use of force on January 3rd will deliver human rights protection for the Venezuelan people. Even more so because there is no pretense that this intervention was done for the purpose of responding to the human rights violations. Maduro and his wife are facing charges, yes, but not for crimes against humanity, not for human rights violations, but for some weird charges related to narco-trafficking. That is not justice for the Venezuelan people. So what we are demanding as a human rights organization is that actually Maduro, now that he has been captured, be tried in a lawful setting for the crimes against humanity he has committed. And hopefully that should be in Venezuela. What we are calling for is a political transition predicating on global universal standard related to human rights, related to the relationship between government and citizens. That's what we are calling for. And there is no evidence right now of either the United States or the existing government of Venezuela being prepared to deliver human rights protection.
Jørgen, you're an expert on the Arab-Israeli and Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And although Gaza has fallen off the headlines a little bit, given the multitude of events happening in just the last few weeks, Palestinians continue to be killed in large numbers there, despite a truce in place since October 10th. The Israeli military says it has opened fire only in response to violations of the ceasefire and that its rules of engagement allow it to target people it perceives as threats. So from a human rights perspective, and as someone who studies the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, how would you define the year that just ended, 2025?
I think the correct way of saying it is just it's been a terrible year. There's no way coming around that. I mean, we think of the ceasefire as a very, very important event because it stopped the war. And while this is true, it's also not true in the sense that so much violence has taken place after that, both in a very, physical sense. New York Times had a report now that 2,500 buildings have been destroyed after the ceasefire. But also, reports coming out that, 100 children have been killed after the ceasefire. But also structurally, I mean, not enough aid is coming in. So even, taking kind of the good news story of the ceasefire, it's a terrible year. But if we go prior to the ceasefire, it's even worse. So, I mean, the situation in Gaza reached famine. And the label famine is so severe that by the time you reach it, it's really too late. Because the parameters for saying now it's a famine basically means that people are dying of famine. And once you reach that level, I mean, it's so difficult to kind of revert to normality for the people that have been affected.
Yes, on the famine, let's listen to what Tom Fletcher, the UN Emergency Relief Coordinator, said this summer.
Be in no doubt that this is irrefutable testimony. It is a famine, the Gaza famine. It is a famine that we could have prevented if we had been allowed. Yet food stacks up at borders because of systematic obstruction by Israel. It is a famine that asks, but what did you do? A famine that will and must haunt us all.
And that famine was a result of direct willed Israeli policy, closing the borders, not allowing food in. And then we add on that, there is a war on humanitarianism. UNRWA has been forcefully closed by Israeli law. They have been attacked to an extent we've never seen before of a UN agency, of humanitarian actors anywhere in the world. Gaza has really been made unlivable. During that war, the last year, the year before that, 80% of buildings have been fully or partially destroyed. 30,000 people were killed last year alone. And because of Gaza, we tend to forget what's happened in the West Bank. And there we have a situation of entrenched apartheid, de facto annexation of the Palestinian territories. And it just means that the prospect for a Palestinian future is just being completely eroded day by day.
Right, and I mean, that ceasefire may well exist, but can it bring about any lasting peace without a clear political framework that leads to Palestinian self-rule?
My answer to that really is no. And this is really a deep-seated tragedy. There is no political pathway to a solution. There is talk that this ceasefire will lead, in all the upcoming phases to some kind of political solution, but that's not really on the table. The destruction of Gaza is so extreme. And Israel has actually passed a law saying that there will be no Palestinian state, even through a negotiated settlement. So all the hurdles that are just being put in the way is just, at the moment, insurmountable. And there's not enough international political will to put the weight required behind finding a solution.
And just as you describe, the Gaza Strip being made unlivable, in effect, on the 5th of January, Israel banned 37, I believe, maybe might be more now, but 37 international NGOs from working in Gaza and the occupied West Bank. We're talking about Doctors Without Borders, CARE, the Norwegian Refugee Council, Caritas, organizations that provide essential, often life-saving services to Palestinians. Israel claims that they failed to meet requirements under the new registration rules. Jørgen, what is Israel's strategy here?
So the optimistic reading is that this is a Russia scenario, in the sense that they have these very official requirements for international NGOs to take part in governing the area. That's the optimistic reading. The pessimistic and I fear realistic reading is that this is about making Gaza unlivable, but it's also about making a de-internationalization of the conflict, taking away international, presence, taking away any mechanism for providing external aid to the Palestinians and having, a presence and eyes on the ground.
Agnès, in December 2024, the organization that you lead, Amnesty International, issued a report titled "You Feel Like You Are Subhuman: Israel's Genocide Against Palestinians in Gaza." And that report concluded that Israel's actions since October 7th, 2 years ago, meet the legal definition of genocide. Israel reacted strongly and described the report as, I quote, entirely false and based on lies. But you're not the only one having concluded that what has been happening in Gaza amounts to a genocide. A UN Commission inquiry mandated by the Human Rights Council of the UN also concluded in September that Israel has committed and continues to commit genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. Agnès, can there be peace in Israel and Palestine without justice and accountability?
Well, it's very unlikely. History has shown that the genocide is product of decades of impunity, emboldening the government of Israel to continue in its attacks against Palestinian and escalating those attacks. Yes, of course, the crimes committed on October 7 have been the accelerant, but there is there is a broader context to the genocide and to the October 7 crimes. That context is one of unlawful occupation and apartheid. So unless those root causes are tackled genuinely through any kind of political process, there is no peace, there is no justice. And not just for Palestinians. This is also the other side. There is right now a fake dangerous message being delivered to people in Israel and around the world that peace can be achieved through this very weird peace process and the actions of Israel. And, it could not be further away from the truth. It is only seeding, the further factors for more violent escalation and more death. So for Amnesty International, one of the priorities must be a meaningful justice and judicial process along the line of what has been initiated through the International Criminal Court. This is why we're calling on all states to ensure that the charges and the case against the Prime Minister Netanyahu, that this move forward, that this goes forward, and not whatever they are doing right now, which is frankly in violation of their own commitment to the ICC statute. I'm talking here in particular of a state in Europe. So justice must be at the heart of the vision. It's not at all there at the moment. There is no reference to it. There is no reference to the unlawful occupation by Israel. There is no reference to the apartheid regime in place throughout Israel and beyond Israel, because refugees, Palestinian refugees, are also the victims both of the apartheid and of the unlawful occupation. So I will say that, it's... I'm flabbergasted by the fact that so many governments and political leaders are going along with the narrative that there is a way forward with that peace plan. It just, in defiance of everything we know about long-term peace prospect. It's just mind-boggling that we are walking to the tune of that peace plan.
I just really want to expand a little bit on the issue of genocide and apartheid, because Amnesty over the past few years have come out with two very strong reports on the situation in Palestine. In 2022, they had the report saying that there is a apartheid, that Israel is an apartheid or conducting apartheid. And now with the genocide report. And, as somebody who's been working on this conflict for a long time, when I started working on it, apartheid was kind of like a fringe thing that certain left-wing activists and, certain fringe academics were talking about. But at around the time that Amnesty came with it, they were not alone. Human Rights Watch came with that accusation. The Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem came with that accusation. And now genocide is also, something that a lot of real heavyweights are coming with. And this is not just because, events are just so quickly catching up with the terminology that even, the harshest accusations just become outdated because reality is becoming harsh at such an extreme speed that, the phrases we use to describe something, they become outdated because reality is just harsher.
Right. And you've said that, the Knesset has said that there will not be a Palestinian state. But in 2025, a wave of countries, including the UK, Canada, Australia, Portugal, France, all recognize Palestinian statehood. And at this point, over 150 countries recognize Palestine as a sovereign nation. Israel has reacted by accusing nations of rewarding terrorism and recalled its ambassadors from some of these nations I just mentioned. But despite more countries, this is very striking for me. Now 4 out of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council recognize Palestinian statehood. Yet Palestinians are not any closer to achieving that goal, right?
Yeah, this is foreign policy inertia. Recognition of Palestine, I think it's very important because it does send the signal that these people have a right to self-determination, that the only solution is that they get self-determination on par with the Israelis. But right now, that is not the reality. And not only is it not the reality, it is actively being destroyed. So what we're really seeing is that the two-state solution is dead. And it's kept alive as wishful thinking because there is no alternative. And this is a deep-seated tragedy. the world has to be able to provide a solution, and that perhaps should be the two-state solution. But the amount of political will required that is not just recognizing Palestine. The occupation has to end. A Palestinian state has to be established with self-determination for the Palestinians, with a functioning state where Gaza is livable, where Gaza is connected somehow to the West Bank, so that it's not a fractured, I wouldn't even know what to call it at this point. There has to be a way out, and not just going up on a stage and saying we recognize the state of Palestine, which, again, I think it's a good move, but it's 30 years too late.
I mean, you need to act along to support your own statement, and that is not happening. So what do we mean by action? The most important one is economic isolation of Israel. Nothing is going to happen until and unless Israel is forced into making some concessions. And that will be the outcome of a number of governments, beginning with the European Union, putting an end to their privileged trade and economic relationship with Israel, particularly through including the occupied territories. Under international law, under the ICJ advisory opinion, no state, no actors, private or public, should have any kind of actions or amounting to actual or de facto recognition of the occupation. That is a very broad definition of what is unlawful here. And right now, most of Europe is engaged into unlawful forms of recognitions of the occupation. There continue to be trade and economic relationship. We have documented in September, at least we have identified 15 companies that have privileged relationship with the occupation, with the occupied territories, or who have benefited or contributed from the genocide. Not only weapons companies, but also IT companies, water companies, and so on and so forth. It must be on the agenda. If governments around the world, the 100 and something governments that believe in the two-state solution, then they need to start talking seriously about economic sanctions. And that is not happening right now.
Why isn't it happening? I mean, at this point, Russia has faced,
Yes.
I believe, 18 or 19 packages of sanctions
Exactly.
from the EU. So why isn't that happening with Israel?
Well, you can have several explanations. I will say, one or two. Most important one. The European economic, technological, and defense system is deeply embedded with Israel. And the relationship is very long, is very deep. We know that Israelis defense and IT companies are working very closely with a range of European intelligence services. So the relationship are very deep and very probably quite difficult to untangle. And it's not just around defense or IT. It concerns many dimensions. And the second reason is probably historical and history. Europe is responsible for the slaughtering of 6 million Jews. That is a reality. That is our history. And it is still having a very heavy weight on how we perceive Israel as, still seen through the lenses of the victimization, the slaughtering of massive slaughtering of Jews during World War II. It is very difficult for Europe to move into recognizing that the state of Israel is a perpetrator. So history also plays a role.
I'd also just like to expand a little bit on how Gaza should not be seen in isolation, because we're talking about, the international system as a whole having deep-seated problems at the moment. And I would argue that what happens in Gaza does not stay in Gaza. So I mentioned already, the attacks on UNRWA, which is really unprecedented attacks on a UN agency, unprecedented attacks on humanitarian actors on the ground. And, when Israel gets away with it, that opens the floodgates for other bad actors. Russia can now argue that, we're no different. I mean, why should we behave differently than a US ally? It means that in other war contexts, there is less protection for humanitarian actors. There's less protection for UN agencies, because once you allow that kind of stuff to happen one place, it's more difficult to stop it elsewhere. And this really relates to a lot of things, right? So it relates to the occupation. How can we, in one context, be against an occupation and in another context say it's okay? Yeah. So, the occupation of the West Bank since 1967 in Gaza, it's more difficult then to be principally against an occupation in Ukraine, because the two are contrasted. Now, we can argue in Europe that, no, it's different, but, a lot of countries don't see the difference because occupation is occupation.
The double standards are so striking and really are have completely destroyed whatever credibility Europe had on the international scene.
And adding to that, you mentioned earlier, Agnès, the fact that there was impunity with, warrants from the International Criminal Courts not really being enforced. And for our listeners, I'm referring specifically to the International Criminal Court's warrants from November 2024, which were issued against Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, and Yoav Gallant, who was at the time Minister of Defense of Israel, and Hamas military chief Mohammed al-Masr. And several countries, including founding members of the ICC, like France and Germany, have said they would not arrest Netanyahu if he came to visit or fly over those countries. And also, we should remind our listeners that it's not just, the West or European countries. I mean, Vladimir Putin is also under an arrest warrant from the ICC for war crimes. And that arrest warrant was ignored by Mongolia, who is party to the ICC, when Putin came for a state visit 2 years ago. So, Agnès, my question is, what are the consequences of ignoring those arrest warrants against the likes of Netanyahu and Putin?
Well, first, regarding the arrest warrant against Netanyahu and Gallant, we need to acknowledge that they were historical, really. They were the first arrest warrant ever against a Western friend, quotation mark, and against a country that had escaped any kind of international judicial or justice framework for decades, in spite of the accumulation of evidence of the crimes. So they were and they are historical, and we should not minimize what they mean, even if they are not fully implemented at the moment. Yes, there are some countries that are violating the terms of their commitment to the ICC statute. It doesn't mean that these people won't be arrested. Justice, particularly international justice, is a slow process. We have just seen last year the arrest of President Duterte from the Philippines, and no one could have imagined that he could have been arrested, including myself, when I was working on all the violations he was committing. So, yeah, at the moment it's not happening, but let it be clear that the reason why the US president or Putin or Netanyahu are attacking international justice right now is because they fear it. It's because they know that it has an impact. Because it is sending a very clear signal to and from the international community, and the sanctions against the International Criminal Court judges. So I am, absolutely convinced that they won't be able to get rid of those arrest warrants, and that it's going to pursue them wherever they are.
Right, and it's not just international justice that is under attack. I'm a former journalist myself, and I've been absolutely shocked by the number of colleagues killed in the field in the last 2 years. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, 2025 was the second deadliest year ever for journalists after 2024. And the committee says that Israel is engaging in the deadliest and most deliberate effort to kill and silence journalists that CPJ has ever documented. Jørgen, journalists are essential in documenting human rights violations, but so are academics like you in getting us closer to truth and knowledge. Are academics like you also facing similar efforts to be silenced? I mean, we just learned this week that a French historian and academic, Vincent Lemire, was barred from entering Israel over his alleged anti-Zionist, quote-unquote, views.
Well, there is a broader international context where the answer is yes, and there is a Norwegian context where, fortunately, the answer is no. Internationally, we see in Western liberal states that academics are increasingly under pressure for things they say. In the US, we have student demonstrators being arrested for protesting against what's been taking place in Gaza. There is massive pressure on academics. Universities are being defunded because of what certain academics have said. Being able to access certain areas is made increasingly difficult. And there is, because of this, also a culture of self-censorship, which is, I think, very dangerous. And watching this from Norway, where I see, colleagues thinking not just twice, but 3 times, 4 times before they publish anything and saying, I agree with this, but I don't think we can publish that. We can't say that. It's scary. In Norway, we don't have that type of climate. So, we're working here in a very different, very safe environment in that sense. And I think that also makes us, carry a responsibility to then be very clear, because we're in a, safe, comfortable position.
Agnès, you came into the spotlight in 2018 in your capacity as the then UN Special Rapporteur in charge of investigating what happened to Jamal Khashoggi. For our listeners, Jamal Khashoggi was a Saudi journalist writing for the Washington Post and a critic of the repressive policies of Saudi Arabia and that of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, or MBS, as we call him. In November, MBS was on a state visit to the United States, where he was confronted by a journalist, and we saw Donald Trump defending MBS.
Your Royal Highness, the U.S. intelligence concluded that you orchestrated the brutal murder of a journalist. 9/11 families are furious that you are here in the Oval Office. Why should Americans trust you? And the same to you, Mr. President.
Now, who are you with?
I'm with ABC News, sir.
You're with who?
ABC News, sir.
Fake news. ABC fake news. One of the
But the
worst.
question is
One of the
legitimate,
worst
sir.
in the business. As far as this gentleman is concerned, he's done a phenomenal job. You're mentioning somebody that was extremely controversial. A lot of people didn't like that gentleman that you're talking about. Whether you like him or didn't like him, things happen. But he knew nothing about it. And we can leave it at that. You don't have to embarrass our guest by asking a question like that.
Your own report on an investigation concluded that there was, quote-unquote, credible evidence that MBS and other Saudi officials were liable for the killing. So, given that even the CIA concluded that the Crown Prince personally ordered Khashoggi's murder, how damaging is it for global human rights accountability when major powers like the US choose seemingly political alliances over judicial follow-up?
Well, I mean, it is appalling. And that statement from Donald Trump on that occasion was particularly bad. And he has made us very much used to his appalling statement. I want to return to international justice or to justice. And I think we sadly need to recognize that justice can be delivered over a very long period of time. So right now, when it comes to Jamal Khashoggi, there are very few conditions being met for justice to be delivered. MBS has been a pariah immediately after the killings, and to a certain extent still remains a bit of one. The fact that a journalist did ask the question demonstrates that he cannot run away from the reality of what happened in that consulate, in the Saudi consulate, and he will never be able to run away. That truth is everywhere. He cannot run away from it. So at a certain level, his attempt to build a different narrative as to who he is has failed. And I think with a few exceptions, the majority of the world sees him for what he is. The king is naked. He's not the modernist. He's not he's nothing but the killer of journalists who likes to pretend is modernizing his country, but under his rule, there has never been more killings, more death penalty, more imprisonment of human rights defenders. So that is a reality. And the killing of Jamal Khashoggi is the door through which all of these truths are being made public. And you're going to tell me, well, that's not justice. Yes, it's not justice. But in the current context, and certainly the current Saudi context, there is no way MBS could be tried for what he did to Jamal Khashoggi. He cannot be tried in the United States for a variety of reasons, including because they've declared him as the head of state is benefiting from immunity, something that Maduro apparently cannot claim. So the conditions are not there. There is Russia and the need for oil. There is Gaza and the need for Saudi Arabia. So we need to keep hammering the reality of what he did and of what he is. We need to keep reminding everyone, including Donald Trump, that this man has committed and is liable for the murder, the enforced disappearance, the torture of a journalist, for an extraterritorial, in fact, attack, and also for Yemen, by the way. And we need to find in those acts a way of describing them as part of building justice, as part of creating the steps for justice. Because otherwise, we may as well give up, and that is not the right way of looking at it. The fact that we cannot see him in a court right now does not mean that we should not see alternative. And the alternative is to keep reminding people about Jamal Khashoggi. It's to keep reminding people about the death penalty. It's to keep demanding whether someone that has such a track record can be a reliable partner economically or politically. That is a role that we, civil society, journalists, can play. And that, to me, is part of constructing the conditions that at some point will mature and deliver justice.
I think this is a good moment to wrap this episode. And, in light of what we just discussed, many people are looking at 2026 and wondering if this is just going to be a continuation of the collapse of the system of norms built out of the ashes of the Second World War. So I want to ask both of you, after everything we just discussed, is there anything that brings you hope for 2026?
I'd like to raise two things from the Middle East. I think the first is just the bravery of the Iranian people. I mean, it's mind-boggling, just seeing them go into the streets day after day after day, knowing full well what that regime is capable of, seeing what they do to the demonstrators. It's just amazing. I mean, it's really hard to put yourself in their shoes. The other thing in the Middle East that, I wouldn't say I'm optimistic, but it does give me hope, and that's Syria. And the reason I say that is because Syria is really on the brink. Lots of stuff can go wrong. But Syria has ended one of the most brutal civil wars in the past few decades. It's gotten rid of one of the most brutal dictators that ran basically industrial scale torture chambers. And those torture chambers were emptied. I mean, unfortunately, very few were alive once they were opened. But just that moment, which ended 2024, I mean, it's still just mind-boggling, just getting to grips with the change Syria has undergone. Now, there are huge danger signs. I think the Kurdish central government tensions in Aleppo now is very, very alarming. And also the huge cost of rebuilding Syria. A lot of the underlying tensions in Syria, they're not just going to go away. But I think we just need to have in some sense, just a cool head and just be very, very aware of transitions are extremely difficult. And we must cherish the fact that there is this huge, great transition that did happen. And I think this goes to our responsibility as international community of, really supporting the good change that has happened and trying as well as we can to put in place mechanisms to ensure that there is no reversion, that the bad things that can happen don't happen.
Well, the same thing that brought me hope in 2025 and the previous years. People are not giving up. We are seeing demonstrations of people's power everywhere, in Europe, in Iran, in Gaza, where the resilience of the Palestinian people is just mind-boggling. We're seeing that in Nepal, we're seeing it in Kenya. So it is not as if people are giving up on what they believe to be their rights and on a meaningful fight. We have the evidence everywhere we look for it. So that is why we cannot give up. Now, I will say that what makes me angry and what makes me despairing is the cowardice of the political elite, particularly in Europe. There has not been a more important historical moment for this political elite to raise to the challenge, and they have not been there. They have not been there for Gaza. They have barely been there for Ukraine. It's changing a little bit. They have seemingly sought to appease the Donald Trump of the United States, but not only. And meanwhile, the people are going in the street. Meanwhile, the people are facing more and more repression, including in Europe, a curtailing of freedom of expression, of freedom of association, a shrinking space for protest, police violence against protesters, people being arrested in the UK for protesting a genocide, while those responsible for the genocide walk free in European capitals. So what I find despairing is the European political elite that is frankly quite coward and is not offering to us, the people, and to the rest of the world an alternative to the Donald Trump and the Putin and the Netanyahu. And that is something we really need to tackle, either through election or through any other means, peaceful means, but something needs to change. Will Greenland bring a bit more bravery on the part of our political elite? Maybe, but it cannot just be because of territorial integrity. We need to see bravery over values and over human rights protection, over the reason why the 1948 system was put into place. That bravery has disappeared. And then we hear these political elites despairing because they wonder whether the people will be prepared to fight, whether we are ready to fight, in this case, Russia. And I'm saying, seriously? The people have fought over and over again, including during World War II, when the same elite that sent the Jews to the concentration camp also attacked their own people. Let's recall history here. And let's find the source of our strengths. And the source of our strength is us, is the people determination to fight for what is right. It's the people determination to protest. It's us coming together collectively, creating associations, organizations, trade union, political parties, and saying that as activists, as consumers, as producers, and as the electorate, we will be fighting.
Jørgen, Agnès, thank you for your time. This episode was produced by your host Arnaud Siad with sounds from CBS News and the United Nations. You can listen to Agnès Callamard's annual peace address at PRIO on our YouTube channel and on PRIO.org, where you'll also find our events, policy briefs, reports, and journal articles, all from the cutting-edge research done here at the Institute.